All right, everyone, once you have your loom all warped, you're going to grab a couple things from the back table. One is going to be a piece of cardboard. These are going to be in strips. We're going to use these as a heddle. You're also going to grab one of the long-ended tapestry needles, and then you're also going to cut off a length of thread or yarn. You're going to start with about an arm span. Typically, anytime you do a trim for that, I would say do an arm span or less, just so you avoid having the yarn tangle on itself. But to get started, we're going to start by adding the heddle to our loom. This is going to create so that you have kind of a nice shortcut you can use for every other kind of run along your weaving. What you're going to do is you're just going to weave the heddle through so that every other thread goes over and under. With this, just make sure that you are taking care to make sure that it is truly over and under. If you do make an error on this and you don't catch it, sometimes it can be a little frustrating because then you'll realize it after a few couple rows. So just double check, make sure that it is that every other warp thread. And then the nice thing with these is it allows you then to lift up that heddle to open up the warp so that it's going to weave the thread through for every other or half kind of the lengths of weft that go through. With the heddle, essentially what you're going to do is you're going to have one direction where you can just bring your needle and yarn through. You're not going to have to do any manual weaving. And then with that other direction, you are going to have to manually put that through. Saves you a bit of time. Saves you about half the time that you would spend manually weaving. So it's not the perfect shortcut, but it does save you a bit of time. And then once you're ready to weave, you're going to grab your length of yarn, you're going to add it to your tapestry needle. When you add it, you're going to leave about a 6-inch tail. We're not going to knot anything because it's going to catch on the warp thread if we do. We want to leave that 6-inch tail so that as you start to go through and weave, if the yarn does start to come off the needle, you have a little bit of a warning before it fully comes off. And then with getting started, we don't want to start right on the end. We're going to start about 5 or 6 warp threads in from the end. When you get that sewn in, you're going to do that every other pattern, and then you're going to leave that about, I would say aim for a 3-inch tail. You can also do a little bit more, but at least 3 inches for your tails. And then as I go the other way, I'm just going to pass my needle back, opening up that heddle so that I can pass that through and have room for my hands. Once I have that passed through, I'm going to close the heddle back up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull through that thread. Once I have it mostly pulled, I'm going to anchor down the end with my finger. I'm going to pull it the rest of the way. Reason for this is you want to avoid having too much tension on those end warp threads on either side. If you have way too much tension as you weave, essentially the weaving is going to start to make almost like an hourglass shape instead of it being straight up and down. So just make sure that you are being careful as you pull those weft threads tight in the warp. Make sure that you have that either loosely fitting or just enough that it's tucking around that warp thread. And then as you continue and as you do that manual weaving, I would say just start to check kind of every few stitches, make sure that the thread is going to go opposite of the previous row. It's easy to check these with when you're on that one, whereas if you make a mistake, you don't do any checking and then you realize later on that there's a mistake. It takes a lot more time to get that fixed. So just kind of check every few stitches, make sure that that's looking good. Otherwise, you're just going to continue that process of going back and forth. With half those pulls, you're going to do just that using the heddle and then pulling it tight and then manually weaving through that other side. As you start to wrap up with your first section of yarn, you're going to start to get ready to end and leave a tail. Same as when we started, we want to have our tail end somewhere in the middle of the weaving instead of at the very end. So I'm going to feed this through part way. And what I want to do is leave, again, about a 3-inch tail. I'll do the same thing where I'm going to hold that down at the end, make sure I don't have tension that's applying to that edge. I'm going to pack my yarn down, and then I'm going to make sure that's left behind. At this point, then I would either get another length of the same color and continue. This can also be an opportunity where you're going to switch colors. So if you are switching colors, you're going to grab new length of thread or a new length of yarn, and you're going to start off on that same warp thread that you left off on. So it's those two tails are going to be kind of surrounding that one warp thread. This will make it so that you're keeping those stitches even. You're not going to have little spots that are slightly shallow in the overall weaving, and then is going to give you a nicer polished look as you start to weave and get that finished up. So I'm going to start from that one that I left off on. I'm going to make sure that is that one that I wrapped around last, and I'll go ahead and continue my row. I'm going to pull my tail till I have about 3 inches left behind. And then kind of same process, I'm going to make sure that that's fairly even. I don't have any tension on the end, and I'll pack it down. And then you're just going to keep going. So you'll keep repeating that process of going through and adding additional rows to your weaving. And just kind of, again, make sure that you just double check, make sure that you don't have any mistakes. It's a lot easier to fix those while you are in that row, whereas if it gets 2 or 3 rows past that mistake, it does get more a little bit more irritating and a little bit more time consuming to fix. So just check those as you work on that manual weaving. The heddle should save you a lot of time and save you a lot of chances for those mistakes. So just double check every now and again, make sure that you are in that opposite stitch as you continue to go through. But that'll be kind of just the general tabby weave. Tabby weave is the name of kind of just that basic weaving structure of kind of every other, that checkerboard sense of having that full weave pattern. But otherwise, that'll be it. Next video, we'll go through wire knots and on interlocking and how to create different shapes.